Hey everyone, and welcome back to our series looking at Necromunda. Now I know I've been away the past few weeks. I had a couple of special episodes I wanted to prepare for you, but on top of that, I've been a bit ill, I went to MCM, and also I was a part of an actual play stream for a team of people called Actual Play UK. I was playing a Black Ark Corsair elf in the game of Soulbound, which is the Age of Sigmar role-playing game. I had a lot of fun, and you can see more of that in my other video, which I'll put a link up here or wherever it turns up. Anyway, we are back talking about Necromunda, and this week we're going to be talking about something that is probably the most important decision you will make in the game. What gang should I choose? In my introductory video to the Necromunda series, I took a look at each of the gangs that were available to you in the original 1990s edition of the game. However, in this series of videos, we're going to take a deeper dive into all the gangs that are available to you now. And in order for you to make the right choice, we're going to take a look at what you need to know about the game in order to make that decision, as well as teach you how not only are there gangs available to you which are come straight out of the box, but also how there's a series of gang types that you can choose to make whatever the heck you want. And so we will take a look at what you should be considering when making this decision. Not only taking into account gameplay with key mechanics, special abilities and styles of play, but also giving you an insight into their backgrounds, attitudes and motivations. And following on from this series, we'll be embarking on another journey deep into the lore of each of the houses in turn, so we can help inspire your games and try and teach you a little bit more of each of these amazing gangs that Necromunda has to offer. And as ever, this is just how the gangs are presented to you in the books. You take them and you make them what you will. And as you will find out, Necromunda offers you the ability to make whatever gang you like. Because as a famous person once said, any model is a Necromunda model. Anyway, with that, I think there's only one more thing to do, but roll the tape. So in this episode, I thought before we take a look at each of the gangs in turn, it would be useful for me to discuss what are the key gameplay mechanics that you will need to know when going about making the decision of what gang to choose. Now this isn't going to be a how to play Necromunda video, because that would take ages and there's already millions of great ones out there. Because today it's just going to be on those key gameplay mechanics, attributes, special skills that all affect the style of gameplay you can expect from a different gang, so that when we come to making that decision, you're as well informed as you can be. So firstly, and as with all GW games, you normally build your army, faction, or gang to a point system, and it's no different in Necromunda. However, in this, it's called Creds, which is pretty much money. And so when you're building your gang, you usually work to a points value set by your arbitrator. Now, if you're playing in a campaign, it's usually around the 1,000 cred limit. So what that means is you have 1,000 credits to spend on your gangers, their gear, and their clout.
So what do you need besides a miracle?
Guns. Lots of guns.
So each ganger will have a certain value in your gang, and then what gear you buy for them will have different values to different gangs, even for the same equipment, depending on which gang you're in. And on top of that, armor and abilities and options available to you will all be different points values and have different values to each gang than they do from one another. For example, like the Eschers get las weapons really cheaply because they build them. And it's also worth noting that some gangs require you to spend more in order to be better at what they're good at. For example, like the Vansar, you'll really want to put a lot of money in good ballistic weapons because that's their best skill, and if you're denying them that, they're not going to do as good as they could do. So I will try and talk about those things as we come to them. So now you have your money sorted, it's worth talking about the stats for each ganger. These are the attributes that will determine their character, as well as their ability to perform actions in the game. Now, every single ganger within every single different type of gang will have a unique set of abilities and stats, and these will have benefits and weaknesses to different various things that will determine the type of gameplay you can expect from that gang. First up, you've got movement, which is how fast your ganger is and how far they can move across the board in one turn. Then you've got weapon skill, which is how good they are at close combat and melee weapons. Then it's ballistic skill, which is how good they are at ranged weapons and going pew 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 pew. And then you've got strength, which is how hard they can hit and how easy it is for them to knock down a door. Then you've got toughness, which is how hard they can be hit and how hard it is for them to be hit. And then you've got wounds, which basically, if you lose all of them, you're in serious shit. And then you've got initiative, which is how good their reflexes are, how they can dodge an attack or maybe stop themselves from falling. And finally, attacks themselves, which is how many attacks they can do in a melee combat. And then we move on to what I like to call the mind skills. These are leadership, which is how good your character's charisma is, how well they can control the rest of their party from keeping their cool.
You do those things, gentlemen, and I guarantee you, at the end of the game, we will be there.
Which leads me on to cool, which is how good your ganger is at keeping their cool and not seeing some shit and going, fuck, I'm out of here, and fleeing the board. And then finally, willpower and intelligence. Willpower is your mental fortitude, so how easy it is for you to be affected by psychic abilities and how good you are at doing psychic abilities. And intelligence, which is your mental acuity, so basically your intelligence, so how well they are at solving issues, such as maybe more of an arbitrated point, but if there's a computer that needs to be hacked, your arbitrator will set a DC value, like a value you have to hit, and the easier it is for you to roll over that, the better you are at going to be understanding and cracking that code. Now, those are all the values your gangers will have inherently, but through the gear that you give them, experience points and upgrades that you apply, as well as skills, will help you to adapt and individualize each of those gangers in turn. So the skills are broken down into 8 types, and each of these add what I like to say is a bit more of a D&D class-like feel to the gangs. Now, it's worth noting each of the gangs has access to a particular set of 3 skills from that main list, as well as having their own gang-specific skill on top. For example, the Eschers have a gang-specific skill which is called finesse skills, which are just like roguish monk-like skills that give them more agility-based and sort of acrobatic-like abilities. And in turn, it's worth noting that within the gangs, not every ganger has access to skills, it's only a certain set group. Usually it's their leaders and champions, and I will talk about those when we come to it. So for now, maybe it's just worth running through each of those 8 skills in turn, explaining what they mean and how they affect the gameplay. Agility gives you better abilities to move around the battlefield, so jumping, climbing, dodging, that kind of monk shit. Brawn, which is get more muscle, bro, like tougher hits, tougher to hit, and just throw people across the room. It's a little less finesse than Brawler, which is more controlled attacks like counterattack, parry, disarm, sort of fighter, swashbuckler style things. Cunning, like a fox. Get roguish abilities like evade, infiltrate, and backstab. Ferocity, get your barbarian on with berserker or unstoppable, or just be tough as shit with nerves of steel and true grit. Leadership, let your inner bard be free with inspiration, or just be a commanding presence on the board. Shooting, get your gunslinger on with fast shot, hip shooting, and marksman. And finally, savant, either get expertise in a specific set of skills like with medic or munitioneer, or be in the clique in the face of the party with either fixer or savvy trader. So with those skills and abilities in mind, you will find the key mechanics that will determine how your gangers are built up and in turn play. And with the choice of gang you make and the choices you make within their set determined options available, you will develop a unique style of gameplay. So that's how the gangers are built, but on top of that you can equip them with weapons and gear that can all affect and manipulate that game style further. And each of the gangs have their own weapons list which is different from others, and within that different gangers get different access to different levels of weapons, and it can all get a little bit confusing. But I will try and explain that as we go through each of the houses in turn, so you can understand what the choices are available to you, so you can know what gameplay options are open to each and every single type of gang. On top of skills, each of the house gangs, and in fact all of the gangs defined in the books, have another level of mechanics added on top, which are usually conceptually related to their theme to provide benefits to their playstyle, which all the while make them feel so much more unique. For example, the Eschers, they have poisons and stims, which provide nerfs to their opponents and buffs to their players. Or the Enforcers have drills which help them work more cohesively as a unit, or the Cawdor have a thing called Articles of Faith, which provide benefits to keep them on the table and do much more zealotry. So now you know everything that makes up a ganger. We've got the stats and the skills and basically all the attributes that define the unique playstyle that a gang has by apportioning those things in a certain way. Now, one other thing to mention is that there is a thing within gangs called gang hierarchy. Now this is pretty simple and obvious and across the board generally the same, but I will mention any differences when we come to them. So this gang hierarchy, well, it speaks for itself. It talks about the leadership roles and what roles each of the gangers play within the gang. Now, there are pretty much two types of role you can choose from. There are the leadership roles and the basic ganger roles. So in the leadership roles, there are gang leaders and champions. Gang leaders, they are your number one. You only have one of them and you must have one of them. And they will be much more important in some gangs than they are in others. For example, in an Outlaws gang, the leader is pretty much what defines the tone for the whole of the gang. Whilst in an Eschers gang, you may have a series of champions and leaders that help define a particular playstyle that you're going to go with. So those champions. Sometimes they can just be a de facto leader build with slightly less stats, but most of the time they can be a really thematic and conceptual type of ganger that speaks to the core lore and history of a gang. So for example, there's the Death Maidens for the Escher. They are basically gangers that have died and been pumped full of chemicals to keep them going and become some sort of murder hobo zombie. It is really cool, and if you have an Escher gang, I really recommend using them. Now, that's the leadership roles. After that, you have basically the ganger roles. Within that, there is your bog standard ganger, which is your out of the box, speaks to the core rules and functions of a gang. They don't get much and they don't get too little. You've then got ganger specialists. Now, these might have specialist tech options or specialist weapon options, but in the end of the day, they're pretty much similarly stacked to a ganger. On top of that, you have things called prospects. Now these are like mini champions. Again, very thematic, speak to the concepts of a gang, but have stats which are very much more similar to a ganger typology. So for example, the Eschers have wild runners, which are sort of rangers that have phalanxes, which are alien cats. Or you have the Vansar flyers, which look like the Green Goblin. And at the lowest of the low, you have your newest recruit. These are your cheapest chips, chuck whatever's left at them and throw them at the opposing gang. Now, in a game where numbers mean actually quite a lot, they are much more valuable than the numbers suggest. And when you come to gangs like a cultist gang, you'll find they will make up quite a lot of your gang typology. And we'll talk a little bit how that affects gameplay as we move forward. Right, so that should be everything you need to know as we move forward to look through the gangs and explain how they use those different stats and skills and adapt them to create their own different types of playstyle. Now, as we move forward looking at the gangs, I must say these are going to be high-level overviews. Hopefully we'll have a time to look at each gang in turn in later videos in much more depth, but for now hopefully this should be enough to give you an idea of their different gameplay styles so that you can start to have a look and see which one is the right one for you. And once we finish looking at these, I just want to note that my plan after this is to do a series of videos that does a deep dive lore into each of the gangs in turn. So if you're coming to this fresh as this episode's just up, why don't you hit that subscribe and the little bell for notifications so you know when your video comes up for the gang that you choose. Or if you're coming to this a few weeks later, do that anyway, and then why don't you do a little search to see if your gang's already up there and you can find out all about their lore and history and start influencing the way you might build your gang. And why I'm doing that instead of going into the deeper dive into mechanics is because that's how I kind of work. Firstly, I get an overview for the sort of vibe and the playstyle of a gang, and then I want to look at their history and their lore, because that's what's going to inspire me into building their gangs and creating those leaders and defining the story that I want to play with them. Anyway, before we get to those lore videos, we've got to finish this series first. So next episode, we're going to be looking at the overview of the first set of gangs, which is going to be the house gang. So those are the ones you know, like Orlok, Delac, Cawdor, Escher, Goliath, and Van Saar. And after that, we'll look at the non-house gangs. These are gangs that have a set of rules and lore defined by GW, but just aren't affiliated with any of the high houses of Necromunda. And then we'll look at the independent gangs. Now, these are my favorites. These are the ones which GW offers you a series of options for rules, but lets you come up with your own gang made up of any model you can think of. So those are really fun. Look out for them. So until then, hit like, press subscribe, and click the little bell so you get notifications for the next episode when we look at those house gangs. And in the meantime, you stay safe in the Underhive.